So welcome everybody for this new section of the Master Future. Today, we are really happy to have with us Dr. Sharika Adams, who is an assistant professor of practice in the School of Education. And today she's going to talk to us about politics in the academy. So now I give the floor to you, Dr. Adams, and you can take from here. And you guys, if you have any questions, please, we ask you that you post on the chat during her presentation, and then we're going to address those questions later on after her presentation. Thank you.
All right, very good. I'm so glad to see folks attending and using your lunch hour so that we can come together and talk about politics in the academy. I really appreciate the time that we are going to spend together for the next 45 minutes to an hour. So, advancing my presentation, here we go. So what we want to cover in the next little bit is I'm just going to share a little bit about myself, and then we're going to talk about politics, macro and micro politics, understanding our sphere of influence, support structures, and then closing thoughts and time for questions. And before I go further, I'm actually going to, let me see. Let's do, I'm going to take you all off the screen for just 1 minute. Let's get this going right. So hang on one moment, please. Pause, share, and just try and share the PowerPoint. Let's try one more time. Okay, let's see if that did it. I'm just going to hide myself here. There we go. And so what I'll do is certainly encourage you all to use your chat feature. I'm going to ask a couple of questions within, well, you have to put some answers in the chat, and then actually there will be an activity in just a little bit that I'll ask you all to do. So if you have a document available, or even paper and pen where you all can do some writing and reflecting, okay? I would also, certainly encourage you all to use reactions and once again, the chat feature. All right. Here we go. I'm sorry, real quick. Nayara, can you still see my chat and everything?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Hang on, friends. Let me act like I know what I'm doing and been teaching on Zoom for about 15 years. All right. Just one moment. Apologies. All right, and so what I have, what I've shared also is just kind of the snippet that you all got by way of presentation. Do you feel like there are factors that's influencing your experience other than you? So politics isn't just for governments. It exists kind of in all facets of organizations. And honestly, that's what I want to take a little bit of time to talk about today. So as Nyada shared, I am an assistant professor of practice in higher ed. And I teach in the School of Education. And in particular, I'm the program leader for our master's program. And the classes that I teach and things that I do include assessment, crisis management, law, our field and internship experiences. And I've been on faculty now for 4 years, and previous to that was affiliated faculty for 9. And my area of interest, my area of research interest is as case management in higher ed, and that really is more of a niche spot of crisis management. So when things kind of honestly go wrong at a university involving people, places, and things, I like to take a look at what that is and why that is. I entered the faculty realm by way of administration. So I've been a higher ed and student affairs administrator for almost 17 years. I moved to Virginia Tech after finishing my master's program at Wake Forest University to work in housing. And since working in housing, I also worked in cultural and community centers when that was housed in student affairs. I've served as a Title IX investigator. Most of my administrative time was spent in the Dean of Students office as Senior Associate Dean of Students. So from absence verifications to students having emergencies and family emergencies, I supervised and worked very closely with the team that oversaw handling those emergencies. And then in 2019, again, became faculty at the university. Things that I love this weekend: March Madness, basketball, coffee. Yep, here we go. Cold weather, not today. I'm a Harry Potter fan, and I have a fabulous daughter. My partner and I have a daughter. So Disney soundtracks is what plays in my car. And I grade to NCIS New Orleans. What I share in my pictures is my academic home, which is Wake Forest Library, one of the first libraries I fell in love with. Being from North Carolina, and I'm not going to argue too much with you, but Winston-Salem is the home of Krispy Kreme donuts. So I feel very strongly about donuts. We will not debate Krispy Kreme versus Dunkin' Donuts. If you are a donut fan, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you Krispy Kreme is the best. And down in the corner is the newest member of our family. So I have a fabulous human being as a child, and our family has recently acquired that joker down at the bottom, almost 16-week-old silver lab named Leo. So he is taking up a good portion of life energy and tearing up the house pretty good too, but he's cute. So that's a bit about me and kind of how I came to this space. We understand that, or I hope we understand that there are, within the realm of higher ed and the way that we work, folks have side conversations and meetings beyond meetings, and there are different types of networks and ways decisions are made. And so what that is, lots of times people are like, oh, it's all political. It's just a game. It's just the politics. Well, it is politics. Higher ed is political. It's not just for governments. And there's a way to navigate that. And once I think I realized that, I actually started to incorporate political understanding into my classes. Because I think to be an effective researcher, faculty member, administrator, it's important to understand the system in which you work. And if you hear folks like coming through my ceiling, we're just chasing the dog, so my apologies. So the university as a political system. Aristotle defines politics as the art or science of influencing people on a civic or individual level where 2 or more people are involved. So if you think about, perhaps conflict or tension, that's not always negative. It just might be that there are decisions to be made and there's a way that things need to be worked out. Colleges and universities are often described as having a collegial political system. And in its essence, university governance, the way universities are run, has its own power struggles. So think politics, its own dynamics, its own power and influence of groups and special interests. So whether it's, the department that you work in, or the college that you work for, the research team that you're on, or the student group that you might advise, all of these different constituencies and areas have interests, and things that are important, to them and drive them in their decision making. So very often things are going to happen, decisions will occur in the workplace that certainly will impact your livelihood, your work, and even more. So what I'll ask in the chat, if you throw it in there real quick, what's just one word that you think of when you hear the word politics? And I'll actually say a word or a feeling. What do you think when you hear politics? I'll give folks a minute just to respond, see what folks are thinking. Stress, bureaucracy, yep. Power, ooh, divisive, complicated, yeah. Negativity, argumentative, very good. Hostile, persuasion, very good. Change. So as y'all are putting these in, some of these are leaning towards those negative feelings, right? Which is certainly understandable. I mean, if you're going to work or about to participate in something that, and there might be tension or a decision that needs to be made for whatever reason that it might be, that could be hostile and persuasive and argumentative and such. Or it could be, if you think about politics as being neutral, it's a way by which we're going to get to an end goal, and everybody has a vested interest in it that might help kind of lower the negativity and the stress that's associated with political decisions. So I would encourage you to think about it in that manner. And so the university in itself, again, it's not just politics, it is a whole system. And it's a necessary skill set, as I mentioned, for any level of professional survival and success. All right, so I want to talk just a little bit, stock images of Burris Hall, yay, Drillfield. The symbol of our, one of the major landscape symbols of our institution, right? And so I want to talk about macro politics. And when I talk about macro politics, I'm talking about those larger factors that are potentially external, we'll say, to Virginia Tech, but things that still influence the immediate organization and things that will influence your work. Think about macro politics on a national level or a state, maybe even local government, the laws, the rules, the people, the funding, the staffing structures, or maybe even a confluence of all of these things that might impact your work, right? So those things are macro politics. Usually when we talk about politics and larger political structures, at least educationally, there are a couple of ways that decisions are made. Here are two models that we talk about. And if you're into org theory and in particular policy making, you might recognize these two policy grounded decision-making models. So the first we call the garbage can model. What goes in a garbage can? Trash. But when you think about it, it's the stuff that you throw in, perhaps without grand thought and organization. So the garbage can model I like to think about it is it's what works at the time that is given. Um, and sometimes when immediate decisions have to be made, it's not linear, it's not rational. So my type A, I need an agenda, colleagues on the other side of the screen, this garbage can model is going to just drive you wild, right? So think about it, if the boss or the faculty member or lab supervisor comes in and says, you know what, we need to do budget reductions because we're being called to resubmit our budget for 3% cuts and it's Thursday, we need it by Friday. Likely you'll use the garbage can model to start making some decisions so that you can get that budget in on time. No notice, there's choice opportunities because it has to happen now. And it depends on the intermeshing of elements. So who's around to offer opinion? What's the deadline? What are the circumstances? It involves intuition and less rational means. Now, if we want to switch over to the rational side, the linear decision-making model, whereas perhaps there's time to form a committee and have a conversation and clearly identify the problem. Think about what are our options to solve this problem, implement a response, assess an outcome. The linear decision-making model helps answer the questions of how are we going to make this decision? And so, you know, in the sphere of your work, in whatever capacity you're doing it, some days you might have projects or things within your area where linear decision-making, there's plenty of time for. And other times you might need to recognize this is a garbage can model kind of day where we need to make a decision on behalf of the department as a constituent group. And this is just stuff that just has to be done. Okay. And truth be told, sometimes you use both. Where when I think about crisis management, for example, lots of times if there's an emergency or something that happens, we have to make, you know, immediate decisions to move beyond the emergency. But then on debriefing or review, or if the emergency arises again, we have procedures and practices and things that could certainly things that, you know, fit for a linear decision-making model. So when you think about, okay, so there's always some level of politics. There are decisions that always need to be made. Who makes the decisions? Well, at a university, regardless of where you are, decisions are made in a governance structure. Now, there are very often meetings, you know, meetings after meetings and side conversations and, you know, early breakfasts and late meals and those sorts of things. But the structure, if you look at the third bullet point, it's how the place is run. Governance structure is unique to each institution. So if you all are going to work in a college or university, understand that you'll need to understand the governance structure. So each institution is different. The way tech runs, the governance structure might be a little bit different than Radford, which might be a little bit different than Roanoke College, which might be a little bit different than New River Community College. But the essence of governance is the same. Okay, there's forming of alliances and partnerships. There are decision makers in the governance body and stakeholders. So the people that can make the decisions and then those that might influence and offer the decisions. Higher education fundamentally, American higher education fundamentally uses the system of shared governance, where there are various roles, but not everybody gets to participate. If you're you know, if you all have ever participated in a department meeting, you get to offer thoughts about the way things are going to go, but perhaps you don't get the final vote. At a larger university event, President Sands gives the State of the University address in the fall. There are also things like town halls and commissions and committees. There are caucuses where you know, folks of similar identity groups can have their issues and interests represented to the governance structure. So all of that is governance in higher education. This is important because of wherever you fall at your university, you want to know and understand in your workplace how to move forward with issues, with concerns, and also perhaps how to provide some level of leadership within the sphere of your influence. All right. Pop quiz, sort of, kind of. Who is in charge of Virginia Tech? There's one answer. So I tell my students it's not a trick question. Who's the boss? Tim Sands. Very good. Who's Tim Sands' boss? That can go in the chat too, right? Board, good. Board of Visitors. Who appoints the Board of Visitors? Take a sip of coffee. Yes, very good. Governor, question mark, governor, it's the governor. So when you think about those macro political influences of, Dr. Sands doesn't just get up and make decisions. He represents the university, but, the president is influenced by a board. Now, depending on your prior institution and where you might have come from, maybe it's a board of visitors, maybe it's chancellors, maybe it's a board of regents or board of trustees. It's the group that's in charge of the president. And those folks are typically appointed by, in public universities in particular, appointed by political officers, the governor. And lots of times that's where you see the interests of the university change based on elections, not necessarily because of a president who can be a president for 5, 10, 15, 30 years, right? But because of the political influence of the board representing the interests of, in our example, the larger Commonwealth. Macro politics, all of those things that are pressing down on the university that will essentially funnel down through Dr. Sands, through the organizational structure and into departments and areas and, divisions, labs and classrooms and all the things. Okay, so very good. If you've ever seen the org chart, I was supposed to share that. So, yep, very good. The dotted line here is the State Council for Higher Education in Virginia. They are also a governing body. So if you're ever like, well, why can't we just add another department or add a new major? Because it has to go through SHEV. It has to be voted on and approved by the governing council for higher ed in Virginia. Most states, Commonwealth, have governing bodies. So, this is the crew that, says, oh no, you said your PhD was going to be 96 credits. You can't just take away 6 or add 10, right? So everything has to be approved. And this is Dr. Sands' org chart. And I wanted to throw it in here just in case you'd never seen it. There's special assistants and lots of folks with the titles of vice. If you go to president.vt.edu, you can certainly study this for yourself. But, you can see in particular, as students, I draw your attention to Vice President and Provost with Dr. Clark, who also connects with and supervises the academic deans of the various colleges. So kind of all things academic is that section of the org chart. Okay. All right. I feel like I'm rushing through, but we gotta keep going. So when we talk about micropolitics, okay, So we've talked about macro politics, government influences external factors. When I talk about micro politics, I want to talk about kind of those smaller issues, those interdepartmental spaces and places, those influences. Maybe they're, excuse me, bosses or colleagues, research teams, your faculty, your admin, the folks more so under and within the university structure. Micropolitics, internal influences to the institution. So there's political influence and decision-making. And I just wanted to highlight certainly a couple of key concepts, right? Within your group, within your sphere of influence, there is some level of authority, whether it's somebody that has been professionally appointed, so the dean of your college or your academic dean, who is usually an associate dean, the head of your lab, the faculty of record for your class. That person has formal and professional authority. Maybe there's also within the organizational structure some bureaucratic authority. So that person is in charge because of where they fall in the org chart, okay? Maybe there's, some level of personal authority, somebody with informal authority that rises to, a charismatic leader level, perhaps among peers or colleagues, folks to whom you look with some level of authority. There are also different types of power. And if you study Morgan and organizational theory, there are ways that control is asserted. That's the way that's what we're talking when we talk about power. So maybe it's control of a decision-making process. That's power. Maybe it's financial control or financial power. Perhaps it's someone that is comfortable with ambiguity or has influence over technology and has technological power. So there are different ways. Maybe there's networking or constituent building. Again, ways that folks can take leadership and garner processes by the power and the authority that they hold. There's lots on this slide, but I also want to lift up campus culture. The type of institution and your workplace environment plays a big decision and can influence the politics and the decision-making. We've never done it this way. We always do it this way. So-and-so will be upset if we don't do things this way. That's not the custom and ritual of our discipline. That's not the way the accreditation standards state that something has been done. Since X, Y, and Z person has retired, we don't do it this way anymore because one group liked this person and then one group didn't. Context is critical. All of that is number 4, culture, custom, context. And I have lots of colleagues that are like, I don't like to play the games. If you're employed, you're in it, you're playing. And so it's important to understand that, there are levels of engagement, but don't be professionally, personally negligent in not understanding your workplace environment, the people who are involved, and the issues that are seen and unseen. Certainly there are stakeholders, constituents, that might include everyone from big donors to students, to alums, to the board of visitors, folks that can influence the immediate decisions in your areas. And then a key concept is also communication, transparency, and sharing. If you think about leadership, some leaders don't say much of anything and they just issue down kind of dictatorial decisions. But then there are other leaders that are very collaborative, almost to the other end of needing to do everything by consensus. How is it that you're receiving and dealing with the information that you have? I also lift up, in particular, stakeholders and constituents, because it's important to remember that, there are different levels of involvement. And those who might be leaders might be at the table, but not have particular vested interest in what's being done. You would think, right? So good leadership would suggest that leaders have a vested interest. But on the flip side, those who aren't at the table, perhaps aren't in leadership positions, those who may not have a voice might be the ones that have the most interest. That's why leadership is important. That's why understanding custom and context is also important. And all of that is politics. All right. The next thing that I want you all to consider is what's called a political map. You are here in the center, the center of your world. And if you look at these concentric circles, the folks with whom you have daily contact are the lovely lavender. That's your everyday crew, people that you see every day. Then there are folks moving out one circle in the darker purple, are people with whom you have regular contact. Perhaps you don't have contact with these people daily, but maybe it's your weekly meetings or folks that you see multiple times a week. And then in the bluish gray circle are individuals with whom you have periodic contact. So maybe they're associates or colleagues, people on campus or even off campus that can potentially influence your work. And then kind of the sage green circle at the very outer edges that's your access circle. Folks with whom you have access and those who have access to you. So you might only see them once a year, but if you need somebody, maybe it's somebody with significant power, you can make that phone call, right? And so think of your areas of influence in concentric circles, your daily folks, your regular contact people, your periodic contact group, and those with whom you have access. Who is in your sphere? Okay. Here's where the activity comes in. So open up a document, jot it down on a piece of paper, but within the context of Virginia Tech and your primary status as student, I want you to take the next 3 or 4 minutes to construct your own political map. So brainstorm the various levels, who's in your sphere of influence. And you can divide it up into quadrants and write daily, regular, periodic, and access. And take the next 3 minutes just to brainstorm your map. Take one more minute. All right, this is something that you all can certainly continue to work on and reflect on at a different point in time. And I want to be mindful of our time. But if anyone would like to share in the chat, kind of what's an initial gut thought about this exercise, or had you even done a political map before? Easy, hard, fun, daunting? Yes. Yeah, every time I feel like I do this with folks, I get that response of, you know, more folks than you think, and you have more contact um, with folks. If you break it down, you know, it might not be folks you see every day, but again, that access level could probably be a pretty powerful level. Very good. Anyone else? We'll certainly continue to think about it. And thank you. Thank you for sharing. Just real quick, as we wrap up, I want to offer just a couple of closing thoughts. So, particularly if you are not of the political mindset, um, how do you navigate politics? So, I wanted to offer at least, and this is, you know, Virginia Tech specific, in particular, support within the system. So, you know, the larger educational environment. Um, Tech has a graduate ombudsperson, and this person is somebody that it's Brian Hansen in the graduate school and Reese Ramos for the university that can offer impartial and neutral feedback if there's an area of conflict or just things that you want to talk through concerning your experience at Virginia Tech, particularly work related. There's also counseling, hopefully some faculty members, or if you're doing research on a research team. Human resources has employee relations that can help guide, particularly within power dynamics. You know, if you're having trouble with a supervisor, that's certainly an option. And then the graduate school in areas of your department. Within personal connections, just folks that people have named through the years, family, if not family support, hopefully friends support, your own peers and colleagues, cohort members, again, maybe mentors and faculty. And for larger networking, if it's, you know, it's conference season in the educational world, right? So if you're connected to professional organizations and associations or student organizations, those are also ways to network and get support. When you think about decision-making tips, certainly scan the landscape for making decision-making opportunities. Understand that good relationships can help make good decisions. I've said it a couple of times, embrace the conflict. It's not necessarily bad. Engage in second guessing, think, and think again. Using data, which is step number 4, harness the power of data. And my personal favorite, practice artful procrastination. Because saying, let me think on something is very different than saying no. Don't feel rushed to always make decisions, particularly when there's political influence. I also offer kind of my own thoughts, and we'll be quick about this. But when you have to make a decision, think about, can I justify my decision to somebody that I value and respect, and do it without guilt or shame? Okay. Be humble and choose your battles. I say this often. There are things that are important, and there are things that are important to you. If you have to use the energy to take on an argument or fight a battle, understand which it is. Okay. Similar to artful procrastination, I say, do not bow to the tyranny of the urgent. Not everything is an emergency. So take the time to think, reflect, prioritize. And then finally, before you make a decision, I always say, ask the question, did you make the decision given the totality of the information that you had at the time? Colin Powell, former Secretary of State, used to say, and I heard this in a speech that he gave, no matter how high up you go in life, even political leaders only have 80% of the information that they'll need at the time. Things will always come afterwards. And so to that end, I applied to administration. Given the decision that you have to make now, did you make the best decision at the time that you had to make it? That is what I offer and my thoughts about politics. And so I will, I think I'm going to pause the screen. Actually, hang on. There are references. I didn't make all of this up, right? With regard to higher education. And I didn't put my LinkedIn. Just look me up, but I certainly offer my email, and you can follow me on Twitter. But I always like to end with a joke. So that's this week's forecast. I think we open it up for questions. Is that correct, Nayara?
Yeah, now we open for questions. If you guys have any questions, please type them on the chat, or you can also raise your hand and then unmute yourself to speak. Does anyone have any questions?
Let's say, in the spirit of faculty, I will always ask the question. Was this new information? Perhaps that's why there's no questions, or are you all just reflecting? Had anybody had this political conversation before or heard it in any realm?
I did receive a private question. Let me put here on the chat.
Yeah, in an era of deep partisan polarization, how do you see political interference in higher ed? Great question. Ooh, if we had another hour or 5. So, I'm teaching law right now, and law, crisis management, and we have these conversations. I'm going to reframe that question and say political influence, because believe it or not, in at private institutions in particular, there are limitations, very often contractual limitations to the influence that outside kind of those macro politics can play. But I think kind of the bigger question is definitely, I think it depends on where you live. We actually read a book called Where You Work Matters in one of my classes. And it's an older book, but good information where, working in, let's turn on the news. Working in Florida is going to be very different than working in Virginia or North Carolina or, another area of the country, right? And it always turns on election years. It always turns, elections and midterms. And it's deeply the partisan polarization. That's why I put up the slide about Board of Visitors, because you get a new governor, perhaps one that switches parties, and they might have a totally different perspective on how the university is run. Think Florida. Okay, let's just go there. For example, because that's just what's on the news, as opposed to maybe a previous administration, and the way that influences the institution is through budgets or lack of budgets or appointment of the Board of Visitors, for folks that will be in positions of power to influence the decisions and the president of those universities and the way that things are run. So election years get ever more exciting for me, because that's the big question of who's in charge. So that's the shortest answer I could possibly give. All right, what advice do you have for grad students who want to be involved while balancing the power difference that exists with funding? You know, I think kind of my gut response was, external grants and opportunities, and searching for those opportunities. I've said to my mom, who's like, you're a PhD and you've been teaching 20 years and blah, blah, you must be rich. I'm like, not in education as a discipline. So she doesn't believe me, and that's okay. But to that end, for example, we have to find other sources. Rich in spirit for real. Just keep it happy. You have to find maybe, well, that's where negotiations and partnerships come in. Other sources of funding. So, the grad school, for example, might have travel grants. If there are, sometimes you have to ask up front. In education, lots of times we have graduate assistants instead of research assistants. I say to my students, name your need, okay? Because you never know around here who might be sitting on a pocket of money that's just not asked for. So perhaps there is some discretionary funds of $1,000 that a department chair can provide with a simple ask, right? To a conference, or particularly if you're presenting or advancing the mission of the institution by way of your own research and presentations. Those are things that I suggest. Ask for what you need, and also do partnerships. Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else have any other questions? Anything, any comments?
I hope it was helpful.
If no one has any other comments, question, anything, I just want to thank you for the presentation today. That was really interesting. I think for most of us, that's a new topic that we haven't been discussing before. So there's a lot to digest, I feel like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it was really, really cool to learn about that. Thank you very much for taking time to be with us here
Wonderful.
today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. Yeah, everybody have a great rest of the semester.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.